Paul writes, "Finally, be strengthened by the Lord and by his vast strength. Put on the full armor of God so that you can stand against the schemes of the devil. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this darkness, against evil spiritual forces in the heavens. For this reason, take up the full armor of God, so that you may be able to resist in the evil day. And having prepared everything to take your stand. Stand therefore with truth like a belt around your waist, righteousness like armor on your chest, and your feet sandaled with the readiness of the gospel of peace. In every situation, take up the shield of faith with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. Pray at all times in the Spirit with every prayer and request, and stay alert with all perseverance and intercession for the saints. Pray also for me, that the message may be given to me when I open my mouth to make known with boldness the mysteries of God. For this I am an ambassador in chains. Pray that I might be bold enough to speak as I should." Jesus, we lift this time to you. May your word and your voice and the stirring of your Spirit be here for our benefit. Your nearness is our good, the psalmist says. May we know that goodness today. May we know your nearness today. Here in worship of you, in exaltation of you, in speaking of you and telling your story among us, may delighting in you. In all those ways, may we make more of you, and may we find a goodness in our soul because of that. Father, we love you. We pray that's the loudest part of today, our love for you. In your name, amen. You can have a seat. So Paul is using this imagery, this kind of warrior soldier imagery. It's I don't know about you, it's not necessarily familiar language to me. I don't know the last time you sat in a room full of soldiers, like, hey, let me see your helmet. And you actually hold their helmet or pick up their breastplate or hold their boots or their weapons or anything like that. I haven't got to do that. I have friends in the military, but I've never got to sit and hold their stuff. So this is kind of unfamiliar language for me, and I imagine for most of us that's probably true. For some of it, though, it's a language that kind of brings us alive. It's kind of like, oh, this is like, I have something to do now. Paul's get like a fresh breath coming through, because we are talking of like warrior and soldier stuff. Like, I have something to be about. There's a purpose behind this language for some of you. Others may be on the flip side, where you're a little squeamish with this language. War language means there's death. It means there's just death, there's innocent death. It means there's damage and destruction. Places that can help and heal people are blown out. It means people are displaced. Refugee movements start because of war. And this language may cause you you don't like it. You're like, this is not what I'm about. Others, it may just kind of be nominal. It's just word only. It doesn't really have a value. It doesn't have that's good, that's bad. It's just kind of, it's imagery. It's the language he's using. But for a first century Roman, this is incredibly familiar language. And historically, we're at a part of Pax Romana. Rome is not at war, so soldiers are all through the Roman territory, just guarding the cities. So through Ephesus, this is a massive city, Ephesus. It's got one of the 7 wonders of the world right in the middle of it. And so it's a massive Roman city, and the Roman soldiers will just kind of walk through and have parades and kind of show their presence to continue the protection and safety of the city. So if you're a Roman living in one of these cities or near one of these cities, this language of armor and of war and of soldiers, like, it's a normal language. It's very familiar. You've seen and probably picked up a Roman soldier's helmet at some point. Or as a kid, you could run up and you could see their breastplates that kind of protect their heart and protect the core of who they are. For us, we don't have that, but again, for them, they do. So what Paul is doing is he's taking something that is incredibly static and something that most Romans have held in their hands, this armor, and he's using that imagery to tie it to something that is more abstract, to the physical. He's talking about faith. He's talking about salvation. He's talking about the gospel. He's talking about truth. I don't know, we can't pick up truth and hold, this is truth, let me show you. Truth is what our soul, it's very static to our soul, but it's not static to our bodies. It's more abstract. So he's taking something very static and trying to give clarity to something very abstract. So for first century Romans, this language is putting something incredibly static to it. John Stott, famous British theologian, says this. He says, Paul's use of armor imagery is to bring a realness to our engagement with evil powers. He's trying to use this language of familiarity with familiar equipment and trying to give it a real life presence in the life of these first century Christians, this first wave of Christians in Rome. And it's not just he wants us to be aware of what our soul has. He wants us to be aware of the work of the enemy as well, that there is an enemy at work around us. And so with Stott kind of as our influence, what I want to do is the verse we're going to focus on today is verse 16, which simply says, in every situation, take up the shield of faith with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. As we unpack that today, I want to start kind of with Stott's influence, that Paul's intention is that we understand that there is an enemy among us and we need to understand what he's doing. And understand his work. Before we pick up any of the armor imagery, he wants us to see the enemy. So we're going to start at the back half of this. So when we see this back half, you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. This idea that, one, Paul needs us to know, and Paul has, and Jesus has, what I would call an enemy theology. So he has a theology, an understanding of God's kingdom, of God's character, God's nature, and his presence that has an enemy in the midst of it. John Tyson, a pastor in New York, kind of explains it this way. He says there's kind of four elements in our theology. There's God, his goodness, his righteousness, his holiness, his salvation, his nature, character, creator. Then there's the world. There's all created beings that we live in. And then there's the image bearers. There's us. There's mankind, humanity in the midst of the world. And then there's the enemy. And what happens in the middle of all of that is the enemy steps in and separates God from all of created order, from creation and from man, through manipulation. Genesis chapter 3, if you're not familiar with that, you can go get a really good idea of what's happening here. And with that, we can go back and say, oh, the enemy is the one who is causing God and his creation to be separated. He's the catalyst of it. But what happens if we have those four parts of our theology and we take the enemy out, and all we have is God and his goodness and his character and nature, and we have a broken and fallen world and a broken and fallen humanity, no enemy, when things go bad and things can't be explained, what are we going to do? We are going to start to blame man. Or at least the heart of man. But Paul literally said a few verses ago, our fight is not against flesh and blood. So when we talk about the theology of Paul, we cannot say they are the enemy. That person is the enemy. Flesh and blood cannot be the enemy. Them versus us is antithetical to the theology of Paul. If you want to unpack it a little more, what you'll actually find is Paul and Jesus' theology is them with us and us with God. It's a withness in Paul's theology. So when we don't have a theology that includes an enemy, we will begin when things go wrong to either make mankind the enemy, which again, you could just live in the news feed of your algorithm and you'll find that happening. Man making man the enemy, and often doing it in the name of God. I'm just going to tell you right now, God's disgusted by that. That is not the way he designed it. But if we can get past that, the idea of making man the enemy, then we will default into making God the enemy. And we'll make God the problem. And we'll begin to say, God is at fault for all the things in my life that I don't like or can't understand or can't give answers to or can't settle. And we begin to make God the enemy. And we can see really quick how the gospel of Jesus begins to look far from beautiful when we see God as the enemy. So for Paul and for Jesus, because Jesus speaks about this too in John chapter 10, the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. Jesus had an enemy theology as well. If we want to walk with God in who he is, we need to have an enemy theology. Does that make sense? Like sometimes, I don't think we do it intentionally, but sometimes we neglect the fact that there is an enemy and we ignore it. And that's what allows us to hate our neighbor instead of loving our neighbor. In reality, it's what allows us to hate ourselves instead of loving ourselves the way we should. Because we don't see the enemy as the one attacking us. We see other people's, or by the victory which we'll see by the enemy, we'll see God as the enemy. God forbid that ever happen. The second thing is there's an enemy theology, and then there's also, in the midst of that, we have to believe that that enemy is at work. The enemy is not stagnant. He's not retired in South Beach somewhere enjoying suntanning in a Mai Tai. He is at work among us. And Paul says he is shooting arrows at us. And he wants them to land. No soldier shoots arrows in hopes that they hit nobody. Every one who shoots arrow, be it soldier or hunter alike, they want to make contact. And they don't just want to pierce and like cause like some kind of discomfort. They want death. They want destruction on the other end of that. It's not hope this doesn't hurt anybody. It's take this and die. That's the mindset of a warrior who's pulling the bow. The enemy is at work, and the arrows are painful and often lethal, and that is the intent of the enemy. He wants us in pain. He wants us to die. He wants our faith to die. He wants our obedience towards Jesus to die. He wants us to be dissatisfied in Jesus. He wants us to delight in the temporal things, the things that will pass. He wants us to be uneasy and unsettled. He wants us to be distracted from Jesus. He wants us wrapped up in the trends of the culture, and he wants us entertained to the point of spiritual stagnation. He wants us addicted to unsatisfying things. He hopes that we find euphoria in the created order and world around us. On top of that, he doesn't just have arrows that can be lethal. He sets the tip on fire. Paul says he sets the tip on fire and then shoots. So the arrow can hit and cause great damage, but then it causes more damage that goes far wider and spreads beyond the point of contact. We don't have to go far back into even American history, like just a few months, to see that a small spark can take down massive cities. The great city of Los Angeles was all but shut down for several weeks because of a few sparks in the middle of some dry fields. That imagery is real to us. We have some alumni who live out in Los Angeles, and the fires were coming at their house, and we gathered and prayed, and by God's grace they turned, and our prayers turned towards those whose houses were burning. Small sparks spread far beyond. Fire has a demolition that is far beyond its initial point. And so when that arrow is lit on fire and hits, it catches everything else around it ultimately on fire as well. So it's not just the point of contact that's destroyed in death, but everything else around it is threatened as well. Like I said, Jesus had a theology of the enemy, and he believed the enemy was active. John 10, the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. Church, there's nothing gentle about an active enemy. There's nothing gentle about it. In my time of working with students, I've kind of found two kinds of arrows, I guess we'd say, to use the language of Paul here, two kinds of arrows that are flying around in the lives of people. And I learn from college students far more than I give to them. And watching them be honest about how the enemy attacks them, then it really helps me see in my own heart the work of the enemy as well. So it's kind of two kinds of arrows I've seen. The first is arrows of fear. The enemy wants to shoot propaganda in our hearts that stir fear. And I don't just mean politically, and I don't just mean socially. I'm talking about wants us to fear that God is not real, and that he is not beautiful, and he is not recreating all things. He is not drawing anyone to himself, and his redemption and the resurrected Messiah doesn't work. He wants us to be afraid of the idea that things aren't settled. He wants us to believe things aren't settled. He wants us to believe the outcome is not already determined. He already knows that the end is defeat for him. And if he can work, he wants working so hard to over and over and over that we will not welcome the outcome that he already knows. As we looked at last week, the gospel of peace. The gospel of peace tells us the end is already determined. And he wants to distract us from that as much as he can. See, peace is where we have contentment. Peace is the place of contentment where our heart is settled. There isn't anything wavering or shaky in this world, that we will know victory in the outcome. The enemy wants to foster chaos. The gospel fosters peace. The enemy, disunity. The gospel, unity. The enemy, manipulation. The gospel brings support. The enemy wants you to know anxiety. The gospel wants you to know calm. The enemy wants you to know shame. The gospel wants you to know honor. The enemy wants you to know disease. The gospel wants you to know healing. The enemy wants you to know abandonment and loneliness. The gospel provides community. The enemy wants you to know lies and believe them and hold on to them and grasp onto them and lock your life into his lies. The gospel says, I will bring you truth. I will bring you truth that is eternal, goes far beyond the moment and the life you're living, on into the spaces time cannot measure. And it'll bring us into the presence of God. Fear wants you to believe that the moment you're in is there's no resolve for it. The enemy wants you to believe that this moment you're stuck in, the problem you're in, there is no solution. So just give up. Just give up. I tell our 15-year-old son all the time, I was like, make all the problems you want. I don't care. Just be part of the solution too. You're human. You're going to make mistakes. Don't just be the problem. Be part of the solution. That's what the gospel does. The gospel says, you have made many problems. That's okay. Here's a solution. Be part of it. Be part of it. That's what Mitchell taught last week. The gospel has come to you and I. And for those who have received it, we know the hope and joy that comes with it. Second kind of dart, and it's a byproduct of fear. The second kind of arrow we often see from the enemy is an arrow of control. See, when we live in fear, thinking nothing is settled, I have to go work. What do we have to do? We have to go work to bring settlement. We have to go fight for an outcome. We have to say, I can't get through this moment. I have to white knuckle my way through it. I have to control the situation. The enemy wants you to think you have control. He actually wants you to fight for your own control. He wants you to think your strength and your gifts and your talents and your abilities are all you need in this world. He wants you to think that. But the gospel says the chaos we have created in our own lives, we cannot get ourselves out of. We need a Jesus who has overcome death, who has untied the knot of death, the chaos, the tension that death brings. Jesus has already brought victory and release from it. The idea of control freak, you've heard that idea before. It is extremely difficult to be a control freak and live in faith. It's extremely difficult. That's not condemnation or judgment. I'm not trying to push anyone away, I promise. No nudging in that one, okay? You can't do that. We used to have a joke, you point, you play. And so if you pointed at someone on that one, that's on you, it's not on them. So, but these are the arrows the enemy, I think, is throwing, fear and control. And I'd actually argue that just about any sin in your life or in the life of people you're discipling, any sin you find in their life, I bet, I would put money on 100%, but if you want different odds, I'll give them to you, is the idea that every sin in your life can be rooted back to one of those two things. Every sin in your life can be rooted back to fear or control. In our confession, as we go before God and thank Him for His grace and mercy, what are we thanking Him for? That He has driven out fear, is what John tells us in 1 John 4. How? By a perfect love. Perfect love drives out fear, is what he says. He's driven out fear. And then as Paul tells the church at Corinth, it's not by his strength we do anything. Sorry, it's not by our strength we do anything. Only by his strength is anything accomplished. In our weakness, he is strong. We give control over. I think an enemy that is that pushy and that active demands some kind of attention. So as we move to the front half, how does Paul say that we should give attention to the arrows of the enemy, the action of the enemy against us? Because we have to understand there's no natural defense system built in us, in humans. There are parts of creation and nature that has a natural defense system. There are plants that when it feels threatened, it can close it and trap entire insects. There are animals that can change color when they feel threatened. We don't have a natural defense system against the arrows of the enemy. So if we ignore the arrows, we will fall to their damages. So we need to give the attention. Paul uses the shield imagery here. And again, this Roman shield, every commentator found it vital that we understood this is not some dinky little shield. This is like door-sized shield. They're 5 feet tall, 3 feet wide. I wouldn't fit through that door, I guess, but most people will. And so you can literally put your entire body behind this shield. And that's actually why it was designed that way, that you could hold the shield up, squat down behind it. So it had a real personal use to it. Its size, its density, its weight was meant to protect you. And it wasn't just a solo act. If you found yourself in a barrage, you could bring another brother over and lay your shield side by side. You could even angle them and you could wedge yourself in between them and you had a broader area of protection. And if it got too big, you could circle several and build an entire wall and fortify a group of people by shield. And if it wasn't just by land but by air, they could throw more Romans in the middle who held shields above their head and build an entire complex of shields. The shield imagery is both personal and communal. Faith is both personal and communal. And if you find yourself in the middle of a war with a Roman soldier and you don't have a shield, guess what they're going to do? Jump in the middle, we will shield you. So if you find yourself at a point in life where you're like, I just can't have faith right now, the best place to be is surrounded by people of faith. They will help guard your heart. They will help guard your heart. And if that's coming from a time of questioning and doubt, or if it's coming just from a time of struggle and just life is despairing, and I just can't do this right now, Shouse. Okay, I get it. Jump in with people of faith. They will hold their shield up and let you hide with them. They will. I think it's important in all of that we understand that the idea that faith is not necessarily the outcome. It's not the product of, it's actually it's what lies between the onslaught of the attack and the victory. It's this middle part. It's the part between, oh gosh, arrow inbound, right? If we could put 21st century language into it, it's like, okay, the radar is showing there's inbound bogey coming, right? You watch Top Gun. I watched Top Gun once, and so I know that word. So like the radar shows, and then there's victory at the end. It's the faith that's in between those two. It's the faith that's in between those two. My oldest son loves the band King's Kaleidoscope, and we have a song called Light After Darkness. And this is what they say. This is the lyrics of that song. You are light after darkness, gain after loss, strength after weakness, crown after cross, sweet after bitter, hope after fear, and praise after tears. Seed after sowing, sun after rain, sight after mystery, peace after pain, joy after sorrow, calm after ghast, rest after weariness, sweetness at last. In all of those transitions that they talk about, from loss to gain, the middle part is the faith. The middle part from loss to gain is faith. The middle part of bitter to sweet is faith. Everything between fear to hope is faith. The middle ground is faith. Faith is the pathway through the battle. Through the battle. It's how we endure. It is hard to know and measure faith before there's arrows coming at you. It's hard. It's difficult. It's not impossible. It's just hard. You want to know when you have faith is when you hear the arrows hitting around you, when you hear them landing. When they're wide left, wide right, or dead on, pray to God they hit that shield. Now, in all of this, I think the writer of Hebrews has a ton to say about faith. So we're going to jump over to Hebrews chapter 11 and unpack faith. Again, all of this is going through Paul, who's saying, bring on the shield of faith so that as the arrows come, the fires can be extinguished. So Hebrews chapter 11. It's known often as the chapter of faith. We're going to go through it quickly. It's a lot. We're going to unpack a little bit of it. In verse 1, he gives us a definition of faith. He says, now faith is the reality of what is hoped for, the proof of what is not seen. Faith is the ability to hold on to what is unseen. And we do so with humble confidence. With humble confidence. See, this language of hoped for and this proof, there's something about those two that make this something different than all these other things. Faith does not exist without surrender. Faith does not exist without surrender. Oftentimes, when we get caught up in the war language and the war mentality, we want to take control. We want it. We think we deserve it. We think the only way war works is by control. Paul says, no, that's not the gospel. The gospel is rooted in us surrendering to the Creator, to God Himself. And only in surrender will you know the protection of faith. That is the metric, that is the litmus, surrender. We have to get to a point where we no longer trust ourselves. We cannot live in faith and control every little element of our lives. It is impossible to do that. The writer of Hebrews, he supports that. Look at verse 6. He said, without faith, it's impossible to please God, since the one who draws near must believe that He exists and that He rewards those who seek Him. He rewards those who seek Him. See, if God is the rewarder, then it is Him who is in control. Only the one in control can give rewards. It is difficult if your children control you for you to reward them. It doesn't work that way. If God is the rewarder, it is God who's in control. And only by faith do we get to a place where we see our lives as God is in control of it. And then he sets a standard here that it is only God who is in control. And there's only faith in God that brings His rewards, His blessing, His inheritance. It is only by faith that we'll find those things. And so the standard of faith is now Jesus. It is faith in Jesus and in His resurrection and in all the powers that come with that resurrection. And in a 25-minute talk, we can't unpack all that. There are books, series of books that unpack the powers that come with, that are around the resurrection of Jesus. And that's the life of walking with Him, by the way, of learning those powers. But what I do know is that we come to understand those powers, all of us in different ways, and we need to learn to celebrate these ways. And I think some of us struggle with celebrating them because we refuse to give up control. But for some of us, this is where I land. I like to understand and knowledge and logic, and I like to see how the pieces of God's nature and character all fit in to give us the beautiful mural that is the narrative of the Scripture. But I like to see how it all interlinks and how everything relates to everything, and nothing stands alone in God's character. I love that. I love to unpack it and see where my head and my heart can both be shaped and formed by all those beautiful truths and powers. Some of you are like, bore me to death, Shouse. Like, why? I don't want to talk about that. But give me the green belt. Let me take a hike. Let me be in nature. Let me sit in open space and feel the heat of the sun. That is, I guess it's measurable, but I don't know the number. It is unfathomable distance away, but my body is warmed by it to a temperature that allows my biology to work right. And if it drops too low, my biology fails. If it goes too high, my biology fails. The sun any closer, any further away, we're not alive. Let me sit among trees and leaves where there's things happening inside of a trunk and bark and leaves that I don't understand. But there's chemicals moving around that keep those things alive, and there's water coming out from underneath it being sucked in by roots and then dispersed through an entire tree. Let me sit in that. Some of you can hear that water being taken in as an act of worship. I get confused and frustrated because you put a seed in the ground and I don't know how it knows to go up. What happens if it grows downward? I've never seen an oak upside. I just wonder, how does a seed know to go up? I asked the question to UT students one time. One guy goes, "This gravity, everyone knows that." I was like, no, I don't know that. It's not that simple to me. Some of you know God's power and beauty just by sitting in his creation and his nature, and it's wonderful. That's not me. I start sweating and I get angry. I get mad. Y'all are beautiful. You're not me, but you're beautiful. Some of you are like, give me my experiences. I have seen the Lord manifest himself in ways in my life that humans cannot explain. We have a neighbor who says, the first time I met Jesus, I was literally in a gutter. Like, not like a ditch, but like, the gutter in front of your house that runs water off. He was sleeping in one of those. And it was in the gutter that he found Jesus. He can't explain to you any elements of the gospel without bobbling his way through them. But I don't know anyone that loves Jesus more than him. And you talk to him about Jesus and he will tell you how he met Jesus, how eternity transcended into creation and met him. And his heart is fully transformed because of that moment. Some of you are like, I have my experiences with Jesus, Cody. That's how I know his power. I look in the mirror every day. Some of you say, I'm going to walk among the people and I'm going to find those who are overlooked, unwanted, and oppressed. And I'm going to give my life to bringing them into equality the way their image bearer, the way their maker made them and gave them his image. Some of you find the work and the act of justice as the way of showing God's power of resurrection among his people. It's beautiful. All of those are beautiful. And there's probably a list of other ways. But the reality is, however you see the power of Jesus' resurrection, it is your faith in that is most vital when the enemy comes. The enemy comes. It is our faith in the power of the resurrection that is vital. The next 25 verses, the writer walks through these examples of our spiritual fathers and mothers and how they lived out their faith in the middle of a world that could not explain it. But then in verse 32, and this is where we'll start to wrap up, 32, he kind of gives us two more images here about what faith can be. In the first one, he says, and what more can I say? Time is short for me to tell you about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets. And watch this. Who, all of them, by faith, conquered kingdoms, administered justice, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the raging fire, escaped the edge of the sword, gained strength in weakness, became mighty in battle, and put foreign armies to flight. Oh my gosh, I want that resume, right? Like, can I just turn that into my pastors? Like, you want me on your team? I don't have that. But we live in a world who says, if you're going to live a life of faith, you're not going to have the authority and power that you can in this life. If you want power, you have to be in control. You have to lead. You have to have people following you and influence them. You have to have people who do what you say. That's how your worth and your value comes. We have a culture that says power is what's needed. I love that the writer said all those things were not done by power. They were done by faith. And let me remind you, the next verse of the verses you're memorizing the next 2 weeks says, for it's by grace you've been saved. But what? But through faith. It's by grace through faith you have been saved. What? It's by grace through faith. Okay, I don't have anything I have a lot of power switches, a lot of things that plug in. I feel like everything I buy comes with batteries. Everything needs power sources in today's world. But nothing I have has the power to move man's soul, rebellious soul, from death to life, from rebel to friend. There is no power like that. But that is the power that faith has. It moves us from the army against God into his very army to say, I am with him, I can dwell with him. We are separated and we are brought into his presence. Why? By grace and faith. That is a power this world doesn't know, church. Please don't be ashamed of grace and faith. Don't give up on being followers of Christ who don't just cherish but also champion grace and faith. That is the power of the church, grace and faith. Don't give up on them. Don't give up on them. Could it cost you? Yeah, it could. You may miss promotions. Who cares? You get to walk in eternity with the Maker. You may have a different friend group. You may live in a smaller house all your life. Your inheritance may be a fraction of someone you went to high school. I don't know what the comparison is. But at the end of the day, who cares? You get to be with Jesus. Wherever He is, that's where you get to be. Thank you. That's where I want to be. That's where I want to be. The writer of Hebrews actually says, the flip side is just as true. Because we know it, there are moments when we don't feel like we have much power from faith. There are moments where it feels like I'm holding a shield up, but the arrows still make contact. Watch what the writer of Hebrews says next, verse 35. He flips it. He says, women will receive the dead. Other people who were tortured, they didn't accept release. Why? So they can gain a better resurrection. Others experienced mocking and scourging, as well as bonds and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawed in two. And not like in the Vegas magician kind of way, sawed in two. It was real life. They died by the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and in goatskins, destitute, afflicted, and mistreated. This world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and in mountains, hidden in caves and holes in the ground. When we read those stories, we would say, oh my gosh, the shield doesn't catch all the arrows. That sounds like, but let me tell you something. What the writer of Hebrews is saying here is like, no. These people will tell you every arrow was caught. Why? Because they knew it was not the physical or temporal pain that was evidence of an arrow making contact. Damage to the body is not a contact. It is only damage to our soul that is evidence of a contact of the arrow of the enemy. It is only the faith, when faith is damaged, that's when an arrow is making contact. Our bodies, they're going to break no matter what. Who cares who breaks them? If it's me or someone else, doesn't matter. Our bodies are going to break. Our hope and our faith is still in Jesus, the resurrected Messiah. You want a broken body? Go read the story of His death. His body was broken as well. And here in a minute, we're going to celebrate that broken body. And we're going to remember it. And it's going to be our motivation to get into the rest of the week. It tells me faith has power, but faith doesn't always give answers. When you read the stories of the lives of those mothers and fathers, our mothers and fathers, who endured these incredibly horrific acts, torturous acts. I don't know how to justify someone being sawed in two. I don't know how. There's no logic out there that'll ever link that to okay. I can't do it. So it tells me faith, the purpose of faith is not to give answers. What it does tell me is the purpose of faith is to give us purpose. The reason for faith is to give us a purpose. Because the only way I can explain someone being okayed, being sawed in two, is if their life is linked to something much greater than themselves. Something that they see their life doesn't matter. Do what you want with my life. I have something greater. That's the only way any of this torture makes sense. The scourging, I did some kind of a deep dive, I nerded out over some of these. And the scourging, I learned, I didn't know what that meant. I always thought it meant just kind of the whip, right? We know the Roman whip. Jesus took the whip. We know this. But the word scourging actually has nothing to do with the whip. It has to do with the pain that the whip causes. And in the Greek, it's the exact same word as disease. Disease. Which for Romans and first century Jews was tied to the pain of leprosy. So he's saying they've endured a pain where your body literally falls apart. Not just, oh, I'm getting old, it's hard to get up in the morning. My knees pop when I get out of bed every morning. It's painful, I know, it happens to me. But we're not talking about that kind of pain. We're talking about pain where our hand falls off. That's pain. That's the scourging that the writer has in mind here. mothers and fathers, our brothers and sisters here, they endured a torture, extended bondage, mocking. They're stoned. They were hacked by the sword. Some of that language is difficult for us. Not just like, it's difficult, yes, it's like a stomach turning, but it's difficult for us to understand. Like, we kind of protect ourselves from even going far enough to understand it. So if I were to kind of put it in 21st century language, it might sound something like this. 35 to 37 might sound like this. They experienced depression and anxiety. They were imprisoned without parole. They were publicly canceled. Whatever that means. I don't even know what that means anymore, but that's the thing, I guess. People get hurt over it, so it's real. They were shamed. They battled cancer in the most torturous ways. They were captured by ISIS. They lived in poverty, all while having little to no community or friends. Man, as I read that, I don't have any of those. If I did, I'm going to tell you right now, there would be a lot of moments where faith would be difficult for me. It'd be hard to hold on to my faith in Jesus. It'd be hard. Full disclosure. If that disqualifies me, I'm sorry. I'm just being honest. But the brothers and sisters he's talking about, they endured it. And they didn't see it as costly. Why? Because they had faith. The enemy never damaged their faith. They never took him from Jesus. They always ran to Jesus. Church, if I don't have faith in something greater than this single life I live, any of those things would be unbearable to me. But when my faith, my proof and my hope in the things that are, when my faith is in the gospel of Jesus, the gospel of peace as we saw last week, that being the resurrected Messiah, Jesus Christ, I'll remind you, who took on the sin of all the world and died both a physical and a spiritual death, only to overthrow both by raising from the dead. And now he dwells, and then he came to dwell among those who saw him die. And then he ascended to the Father, and he's seated at the right hand. And from that seat, he is restoring me through faith to my Maker, who again I rebelled against. And that rebellion left me at eternal odds against him. And Jesus is bringing me back into a pristine relationship with that God, that is the relationship that God established with me in the beginning, that he designed. And if my faith is in that, then any temporal pain I may face is redefined. Not just endurable, but it is redefined. And it points me to something greater than myself. So where faith doesn't give answers, it gives you purpose. The purpose is Jesus. Whatever that is, in that moment and in your heart, it gives us Jesus. So church, my prayer this week as children of God, may we commit this week to be aware of the shield of faith that has been gifted to us by God, and ask God to allow us to see the fiery darts of the enemy that have been spared from us. In other words, may we pull that shield down and see the arrows that cover it, that had the shield not been given to us, we know what would have taken us out. May we see those moments in our lives, those people in our lives, those opportunities in our lives. May we stop and look at them this week and not fear them. Don't fear them, and don't try to turn them around and take control of them. Genuinely just sit and think Jesus, that he took the arrows on the cross. He took the broken body that we could have had. May we just worship him more.